Hey everyone, it's Justine from It's Just Paper, and I'm so excited to be a part of this year's Advent Calendar. Let's open up today's box and make something pretty. All right, here's the big reveal. It is day 7, and I get to open up this, and I don't even remember what I designed in this, to be honest with you. So let's open it up. Oh, I love this collage stamp. It's so pretty. So this is a full-size, nice size stamp here, and it's got this cluster of flowers as well as butterflies and a couple of sentiments, so it's perfect for creating a card. There's also a code on the back here. If you want to shop the It's Just Paper line, you'll get a little bit of a discount. All right, so let's take a look at what we can create with this stamp. Now in my videos, I'm always looking at ways that I can teach you how to do something, and so we're going to be doing that today. Today's no different. We're going to stamp out this stamp. We're going to go through a bunch of best practices on using colored pencils, and we are going to do some best practices on embossing with that, and just some really beginner-friendly things if you want to begin coloring. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stamp out the stamp, and usually when it comes to a brand new stamp, you want to season your stamp. You can do that in a few ways by rubbing your hand over it. I like to just stamp it a few times on a scrap piece of paper, like copy paper that I can just throw away, or any sort of scrap paper. And you could just use a clean white eraser and just go over top. It'll just take off any residue from the manufacturing process. I'm not going to worry too much about it though, because this stamp here that I just stamped down, I'm not going to be using this. I'm only using this as my guidelines. So I stamped it once. I'm going to clean my stamp and I'm going to leave it in my stamping tool. And I'm just going to set my stamping tool off to the side here and get my coloring done. This is going to be a perfect way for beginners to start to learn how to blend their colors when they are coloring. And if you aren't a beginner, then I would suggest first stamping it in just an ink that you want the stamp to be colored in, whether it's black or a gray or a brown or whatever the case is. You don't have to do the embossing part. I like to heat emboss when I'm finished, when I'm teaching beginners, because any sort of flaws you may have in your butterflies, you're not going to really see them at all once you heat emboss over top. So let's get started with some tips and tricks for best practices of using colored pencils. First up, you'll notice that I sharpened my pencils right away, and I sharpened them to an extremely sharp point, and I constantly sharpen my pencils through the process. I always pick a dark color, a medium color, and a light color. And the light and the dark color should be very far away from each other on the color scale. Go for contrast. That's how you get the best results with your blending and get the most stunning, vibrant images. I'm starting off with the darkest color here, thinking that my light is pointing in from the top left corner. So I'm trying to think of where my shadows are going to be. Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about when I'm talking about shadows, it's where an image is going to be the darkest. When you shine a light on something, there's going to be dark areas and light areas. And if you don't understand that, we're going to color the last butterfly in a way for people who don't understand light source, because it took me so long to understand it. The nice thing about butterflies and flowers when it comes to light source is generally all of them are roughly the same thing, so that if you color these a lot, it's not a big deal. So what I tend to do, if you think of a butterfly wing, it goes indented to where the body is. So towards the body, it's going to be dark, and going towards the tips of the wings, it's going to be lighter. So I always grab my darkest color, and you'll see that I go from the center where the body is of the butterfly, and I flick outwards towards the outer part of the wing. I also add a little bit of darkness at the edge, because that's just going to create a lot of contrast here. And then not only that, I'm going to also really darken up the area of the wing on each the left and the right side, where the wing would not necessarily separate, but where it indents in the center. You'll notice that I put a nice dark line just to once again get some contrast in the image. After that, it's easy peasy lemon squeezy. We grab our medium color, we go start over top of the dark color and flick outwards, extending it more than the dark color, so that you're blending the dark and the medium color, and then you're extending it so that the medium color has a life of its own. And then you're going to take your lightest color and you're going to fill in the rest of the image. The thing that's really necessary when it comes to colored pencils is that you're using non-smooth paper. So use paper with a little bit, it's called tooth to it, a little bit of texture. Smooth is not going to allow you to create blends. And the other thing is that you generally, when you're coloring with colored pencils, would never go over the image only one time, at least 2 times. That's going to give you the best blend. And don't forget to sharpen your pencils over and over again so that you're using the finest tip. Because when it comes to flicking outwards, you really want to get those super thin detailed lines. It does take practice and a little bit of muscle memory in your hand, but I have all the confidence in the world that you'll get it. And don't worry, as I said before, if it doesn't look good, what we're gonna do is we're gonna heat emboss the image afterwards, and it's gonna cover up any flaws. I just want to make a note that the last butterfly on this image, the one on the left side, that we color last, you don't have to put a lot of detail and effort into that one because there's a lot of detail. When I heat embossed over top of it, you could barely see any of the coloring details. And that's pretty much all there is to it when it comes to coloring a butterfly. When it comes to flowers, all I do is take a look at which petals are overlapping another petal or maybe partially covering another. And that line there is the line that you're going to use to color it dark. Similar to the butterfly, when you go towards the center of the flower, it's going to be darker than the outer edges. And the only thing that you do have to kind of take care of a little bit is where the petals curl. You want to make the back side of that really dark. And same thing as before, just flick outwards with the dark color, move in with the medium, overlap it slightly and extend it a little bit more, then the light color. Go in more than one time, especially if you're going to be, let's say if you don't have a lot of time or you don't want to put a lot of effort into things, the best thing to do is if you're going to go over it a second time and you want to take a sort of lazy way approach, is to just do the darkest layer just to add those flick lines. That's going to really add all the details. So that's pretty much it when it comes to coloring. So I've sped you up for the rest of the image so I don't bore you to tears. And that's how I colored the image. It looks really great on its own. And if you're really confident in your coloring and you really love it, you can just leave it as is right now. You may want to just grab this, ink it up a second time, maybe in that wheat colored ink I use or black ink or whatever the case is. And then you can stamp over it a second time and leave it as is. You could also stamp the first time and the second time in a very, very light ink and then do, it's called no line coloring, which means I would just leave it as is without really having any stamping lines. But because this stamp set also contains some solid images, that's not going to be the best technique to do. So overall, I would just normally leave it like this. But I do want to show you that if you're not happy with your coloring or you feel like you're a beginner and you just need to practice a little bit more, then you're just going to go over top of the image a second time, and I'm going to ink up with some embossing ink this time, some for heat embossing, whether it's Versamark or another brand, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to then cover this with some white embossing powder. And you'll see what I mean when it comes to any sort of flaws, because a lot of this is going to get covered up. So I always stamp a couple of times with my embossing ink just to ensure that I have it all correct, and I keep pushing it into the corner. And the reason being is because at this point in time, I've put a lot of time in my card and I really don't want to stamp it only one time, maybe have areas that weren't inked up all that well, and then unfortunately I just ruined my image. I really don't want that to happen. So I went ahead, stamped the sentiment, stamped the image again, and then I'm adding some fine detail white embossing powder. And I'm just going to pour this over top of the image. And I think a lot of you are just gonna be like, you just ruined it all. But it's gonna look great, I promise. It's not going to look as, I would say, stunning as it is with leaving just your coloring, if you like to color and you feel like it's a good colored image. But overall, this is a wonderful way to get started in the coloring. So let's grab a heat tool now and just heat all of this up. I try to heat my heat tool at least a minute before I apply it to my paper, just so that it's nice and hot when it's getting there and it'll melt the powder right away, because the longer you apply the heat, the more the paper is going to warp. But no worries about warping, because you could just add a strong adhesive to the back, or you could sit it under a heavy book when it's done. Or if you have some clean die cutting plates, you can run it through your die cutting machine actually. If you don't have any embellishments on it, it's just flat like this one. And it will also flatten out your card quite well. So now I've heat embossed over top. I'm happy with the image. Any flaws that may have been there, they're very distracted by the white embossing powder. And I love white embossing powder on craft cardstock. I think it looks really great. And then I'm gonna go ahead and just simply cut down my sentiment and add it to the front of my card. Very easy. So I'm gonna grab myself a card base. The card size that I'm using today is A2. So the panel was 4 by 5 1/4, and the card base is 8.5 by 5.5, and then obviously fold it in half. But you can make this really any size card that you like. I think it would look great on a 5 by 7 as well. It's nice and large, so it will fit lots of different card sizes. And then I'm just going to glue my panel on top of my card base. You'll notice I cut 1/4 of an inch smaller so that I have a nice little frame around it. It's just craft on craft, so it's not super noticeable. If you want some more contrast, you could use a white card base. That would look really nice as well and will also bring out more of a focus in the white embossing powder. Lastly, I'm going to add some embellishments to my card. When it comes to adding embellishments, I add the glue first so I don't think too much about things. I always add a triangle. And then I go in and I try to use either an odd amount of these triangle clusters or an odd amount of embellishment or an odd amount of sequins. If that's the case. So here I made technically 3 triangles. I made the bottom left first, the top right, and then I created one really long skinny triangle, I guess you could say, with the last 3 dots that I applied. And I'm just going to use a picker-upper tool here and some jewels, and I'm just going to place them on top of the glue. I find if I glue the sequins or the whatever I'm using one by one, I overthink things and it doesn't look great. So I generally put the glue down first and then I place them on top. I don't know, that's just the way I work. So I hope you enjoy creating with this stamp set. Be sure to tag CraftStash so we can comment on all your beautiful creations. Looking forward to seeing them.